While there are many who enjoy the original Gun Griffon games, as well as Blaze's faster and more arcade-focused gameplay, there simply aren't many who've played Gun Griffon-Allied-Strike. There could be a few reasons why that is, anything from the seemingly high difficulty curve all the way to the game series being very Japanese, and the Xbox failing to, even today, capture a significant Japanese audience. It could also be that Allied Strike was released around the time that Mech Assault Lone Wolf was, and simply put, that game had a player base not only from the first game, but also the MechWarrior and Battletech community. Then again, it's more likely that all the attention was being put on a certain gaming juggernaut, Halo 2, so a lot of the other original Xbox games released in 2004 simply didn't get noticed. For Allied Strike, Tecmo would take on publishing duties. It's almost baffling how many companies would tackle these releases, with From Software handling the first, ESP for the second, and, for Blaze, Capcom in Japan, and Working Designs in the US. Game Arts was known for taking a more unique approach to games, but by 2004 they were starting to die down in terms of output. They would publish a lot of good games, but the vast majority would be tailored towards the more niche audiences of prior IPs. Weirdly, they would also develop Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Smash Up, the TMNT-inspired Smash Bros. Clone. For a studio that is primarily known for niche RPGs, space shooters, and mech games, it's their oddest contribution. With Allied Strike, Game Arts would share development duties with Korean studio Kama Digital. Information in this group is oddly slim, but it seems like they might have had some light involvement with a couple Rainbow Six expansions over the years. Now, I really wanted to rip into Allied Strike for its blistering difficulty and unfair mission parameters. However, while I was capturing footage for this review, I happened to stumble upon a massive error pertaining to the game's difficulty modes. You see, my disc defaulted to easy when I started a new game. I noticed this only when I saved after missions. For an apparent easy mode, I found almost every mission nearly impossible. My AWGS was the equivalent of a heavy armored sardine can. I was able to get through the first few missions, but it took an ungodly amount of time to get through it. Curious, I wanted to see just how hard the game was on normal, so I switched the difficulty over, and lo and behold, the game's easy mode is actually harder than its normal mode. For some reason, maybe a case of mislabeling or an error that went unnoticed, the game's easy mode is actually hard. And when I say that it is hard, I mean that when the third mission comes along, it's downright impossible. I'm not sure if this was a case specific to my copy or if it was something many others have experienced as well. However, doing this made the game far more balanced. Thankfully too, as my hopes for getting through this game were growing increasingly dim as time went on. So what was the game like when I actually found it playable? Well, it's surprisingly decent. Yeah, I think that's the best word, decent. Honestly, compared to Blaze, Allied Strike is far closer to the DNA of the earlier games. No longer is there a focus on speedy, shotgun-wielding Hymax 3. This is, instead, the canonical reboot that it's said to be. Though, I find that statement a little bit strange. Gun Griffon games don't have an actual storyline. They are just events taking place during a conflict without any actual beginning or end. In fact, the first mission in Blaze took place at a later date than its following missions. Allied Strike has arguably less information than that, lacking even Blaze's tucked-away timeline explanation menu. This game simply begins with a trailer for the game itself, not even a couple sentences on where we are or what's supposed to be happening. This is just a war with the typical world powers involved, and mechs. As the wider opinion about Allied Strike is that it's a messy, unapproachable game, let me instead focus on some of its stronger points first. Firstly, I'd say that the game controls extremely well. This is certainly due to the advent of controller standardization, and this game remains the most accessible in terms of general playability. It also features the ability to switch between third and first person viewpoints, which lets you actually see the AWGS you're in control of. It's not necessary, but it's a really nice touch. Gun Griffon's original weaponry selection returns here as well, with a few extra variable options for added variety. One of my biggest complaints with Blaze was that the sound design was lacking in comparison to previous entries. This has been remedied entirely, allowing a more modern audience to experience the percussive sounds of a cannon shell the size of a small motor vehicle colliding with a tank. Though at this point, Allied Strike is 20 years old, so would that really be modern? What do you think? Let me know your opinions in the comments below. Once again, multiple AWGS units are playable. even unlocking a bonus unit once the game has been completed. Rather than the measly selection available in Blaze, there are far more options from the beginning, allowing for a lot more variety in gameplay. Gungriffon 2 allowed this through its survival mode, but with Allied Strike, changing to a different mech is available immediately during the story mode. Sadly, however, the survival mode didn't come back. There is a genuine multiplayer mode rather than a two-seater mode, but I'll be getting to that later on. Companions also return, allowing you to select an AI friend to take along with you, though they have a tendency to wander off or chase enemies down, usually resulting in immediate destruction. It's always nice to have a separate target for enemies to focus on though, even if it's for an extremely limited amount of time. And on the topic of companions, item drops from Blaze are gone too, with supply helicopter drops returning. Compared to every other game in the series, Allied Strike has the most in terms of content. This doesn't only apply to the available AWGS units. Whereas the first two games had a solid 8 missions and Blaze 4 with alternating times of the day, Allied Strike has 13. However, it also ends up being the least replayable. There is a returning aspect of score, but there is no scoreboard, ranks, or unlockables tied to this value. Random boxes do not return, and since the original Xbox Live service is no longer available, its multiplayer modes are limited to system link capabilities. This is a shame, as apparently there was an option to play cooperative and not strictly versus modes. This game was clearly aiming at building an online fanbase. Why do I say this? Well, it could be that the whole upper right corner of the screen has been dedicated to telling players if they are signed in or not. So if you couldn't tell by the footage, this is why, even during single player mode, the game told me I wasn't signed in to Xbox Live. I tried to find some workaround to perhaps have my username up there, but I couldn't find a way. I'm sure someone out there is savvy enough with that sort of thing, but I apparently am not. Now, I wouldn't say that any of the following additions are bad, but I don't think that they work out as well as the developers thought they would. Biggest and most detrimental of all being body damage, which means that enemies can disable a certain part of the player AWGS. This also means that it'll prevent players from performing a certain action, such as seeing the radar, firing arm weapons, or performing jumps. With only 4 damageable areas, this didn't leave a whole lot for dispersal when it came to enemy fire, not in comparison to a game like MechWarrior. This means that inevitably a major function will be disabled. For me, it always seemed to be the head and arms, both being situations that made the game absolutely frustrating at times. Weapons also seem to be slightly unbalanced, with the MG now being far more powerful in comparison to other weapons. It doesn't matter what version you select, they all operate essentially the same. To destroy an enemy AWGS with the standard gun, it takes a noticeably longer amount of time than it does with the MG, which blew me away as I was often able to take down the toughest enemies like the Mammoth more effectively with MG fire. There was some graphical slowdown, but it mainly happens when there are high numbers of enemies on the screen or water is present in an area. This is likely a system limitation. A lot of particles and light effects seem to be tied to weapon fire and impacts, so yeah, it's pretty much likely that this was the case. I was really expecting Allied Strike to be the worst Gungriffon game. While it certainly does have some annoying aspects, I wouldn't say that it's the worst. In fact, I don't think there is genuinely a bad Gungriffon game. Most flaws within the series are prevalent throughout. Every game can technically be finished within a couple hours, and none of them have a storyline. They are merely connected by similar mech designs and the idea of a worldwide conflict. Allied Strike fits snugly in with the first 2 games. However, as Blaze had been a more popular entry due to it being on a more popular system, it could have been that the few familiar at the time were using that game as a launchpad. Going from Blaze to Allied Strike would likely be extremely jarring. That, and there was likely not enough Gungriffon fans left over to lift things up. Gungriffon has, for many years, been a favorite to many. However, the series fell off completely in 2004. Game Art's contributions would start to waver after its founder,
Takeshi Miyaji,
died after surgery to remove a brain tumor in 2011. While he did leave Game Arts before his death in order to establish a mobile game studio called G-Mode, the Gungriffon series was one that he personally helped create alongside Sylpheed, Grandia, and Lunar. It's likely that, out of respect, Game Arts simply didn't continue the series. I like to think that it's an action as virtuous as that, though it could have also boiled down to a dwindling interest in the IP. Whatever the case, though at a very minimal level, the series still lives on through those longing to rediscover the Saturn and its library, or create videos such as I'm doing on the internet. I'm Kei-Nova. Thank you for watching, and if you're new to the channel, please like, and if you like what I do here, subscribe. If I happen to get 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, I will buy and play Steel Battalion on the original Xbox. That means a full-fledged review covering the controller and everything about the game, including the sequel. So if you want to be part of that, subscribe now. And of course, thank you very much to my current subscribers, and I'll see you in the next video.